The moment I knew something was wrong, truly wrong, not just the low hum of unease I'd been ignoring for years, was a Saturday afternoon in September, sitting on a park bench with a 7-year-old girl who had more courage than I ever did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Stephen Harper. I'm 68 years old. I run a grocery store on the corner of 5th and Chestnut in a small Pennsylvania town where everybody knows your business and pretends they don't. I've run that store for 35 years, ever since my father handed me the keys and said, "Don't let it die, Stephen." I didn't. Through recessions and superstores and online ordering and everything else the world threw at small businesses, I kept Harper Family Market alive. My hands ache now. Arthritis has turned my knuckles into swollen knots that throb when it rains, but I still open those doors at 6 every morning because routine is the only thing that's kept me from falling apart. 7 years ago, my daughter died, or so I believed. Her name was Willow. Willa, we called her. She was my only child, and she was everything good about me and my wife Gloria, combined into one person. She had Gloria's laugh this loud, unself-conscious thing that turned heads in restaurants, and my stubbornness, which Gloria always said would either save Willa or destroy her. Turns out, in a way, it did both. Willa died in a car accident en route Gin. That's what they told me. March 15, 2017. 2 officers on my porch at 3 in the morning. Faces arranged in that careful blankness cops practice in the mirror. Vehicle went off the road near mile marker 47. Hit a tree. Caught fire. By the time the fire trucks arrived, there was nothing left but twisted metal and smoke, and something inside that they said was my daughter. They said she didn't suffer. I've never believed that. Not because I had evidence to the contrary, but because the universe has never been that kind to me. Brad identified her. Bradley Wallace, my son-in-law. He'd married Willa 3 years before the accident, and they had a baby girl together, Ivy, who was 6 months old the night her mother supposedly burned to death on a dark highway. Brad told the police it was Willa. Dental records confirmed it. The funeral was closed casket because there was nothing left to look at. We cremated what remained and put the ashes in a brass urn that sat on my mantel for 7 years like a shrine to a lie I didn't know I was worshipping. 6 months after Willa's funeral, Gloria died. The doctors wrote cardiac arrest on the death certificate, but that was just the medical translation for what actually happened. My wife died of grief. I watched it happen in slow motion, watched her shrink, watched the light leave her eyes a little more each day, watched her stop eating, stop sleeping, stop caring about anything except the daughter she'd never see again. I found her on the kitchen floor one Tuesday morning, collapsed beside the coffee maker Willa had given us for Christmas. She looked peaceful, which made it worse. Peace was something Gloria hadn't felt in months. After that, it was just me. Me in the store in a quiet house full of ghosts and a brass urn I couldn't bring myself to open. And Ivy. There was always Ivy. I'd made Willa a promise years before the accident, one of those conversations young parents have when they're writing wills and buying life insurance and pretending mortality is just paperwork. "If anything ever happens to me," she'd said, sitting across from me at this very kitchen table, "promise you'll take care of Ivy. Promise me she'll have everything she needs." I promised. Of course I promised. What father wouldn't? So every January, like clockwork, I wired $40,000 to Brad's account. The memo line always read the same thing. Family support. $40,000 a year for 7 years. $280,000 total. Money I earned with aching hands and sleepless nights, stocking shelves and ringing registers, and smiling at customers when all I wanted to do was close the blinds and disappear into the dark. I did it for Ivy. I did it for Willa's memory. I did it because that's what family does. Brad never said much about the money. A text in January, "Got the transfer, thanks," and then silence until the next year. He never sent updates about Ivy's school. Never invited me to birthday parties. Never called to chat or share a funny story about something Ivy had said. The only time I saw my granddaughter was every other Saturday, when Brad would let me take her for ice cream at Riverside Park, 2 hours, twice a month. That was the deal, though nobody had ever formally made it. It was just understood. Brad set the boundaries, and I respected them because I was terrified that if I pushed too hard, he'd take even those 2 hours away from me. I should have pushed. I should have asked why a man receiving $40,000 a year couldn't be bothered to send a single photo of his daughter's school play. I should have wondered why Brad's thank you texts got shorter every year. Why he never invited me inside. Why Ivy always seemed a little too quiet when I dropped her off. But grief has a way of making you stupid. It wraps around your brain like fog, and you mistake the blurriness for peace. That September afternoon at the park, the fog started to lift. It was our usual Saturday. Ivy sat beside me on the bench near the old oak tree, the one with initials carved into the trunk by teenagers who probably had grandchildren of their own by now. She was eating strawberry swirl ice cream. I had chocolate chip. She was telling me about her spelling test. She'd gotten an A, and her face lit up the way Willa's used to when she was proud of something. For just a moment, sitting there with the sun warm on my face and my granddaughter's laughter in my ears, the world felt almost okay. Then Ivy stopped laughing. She set her ice cream cone carefully on the bench beside her, which was strange because Ivy never set down ice cream. She guarded it like treasure. She glanced over her shoulder toward the playground where other children were shouting and chasing each other, and then she leaned in close. So close I could smell the strawberry on her breath. "Grandpa," her voice dropped to a whisper. "Please, stop sending him money." I blinked. The words didn't make sense, like she'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "The money you send, Daddy." Her small hand gripped my sleeve, and I felt her fingers trembling. "Please stop. And Grandpa." She looked over her shoulder again, quick and nervous. "Come to the house. Come when he doesn't know you're coming. You need to see." My chest tightened. "Ivy, what are you talking about? If something's wrong, just watch him." Her eyes, God, those eyes, identical to Willa's, were wide and frightened in a way no 7-year-old's eyes should ever be. "Promise me you'll watch him." "Ivy." She pulled away suddenly, hopping off the bench with the practiced ease of a child who'd learned to end conversations before they became dangerous. "I have to go. He gets mad when we're late." "Wait, Ivy, please." But she was already walking toward the parking lot, ice cream abandoned and melting on the bench beside me. I watched her go, this tiny person with her light-up sneakers and her pink backpack, carrying a weight no child should know existed. The drive to Brad's house was silent. Ivy sat in the back seat staring out the window, arms wrapped around that backpack like it was the only safe thing in the world. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to pull the car over and hold her and tell her whatever was wrong. Grandpa would fix it. But the look on her face, that tight, closed expression, like a door slamming shut, told me not to push. Not yet. Not here, where Brad might see. Brad's house was a modest 2-story on Maple Street. White siding, black shutters, a lawn perpetually a week past needing a mow. I'd helped him with the down payment 4 years earlier, another check written without a second thought, another piece of my savings handed over, because that's what family did. The house looked the same as always. Unremarkable. The kind of house you drive past 1,000 times without noticing. Brad was waiting on the front steps when we pulled up, arms crossed, face flat. "You're late," he said. "Traffic." I lied. Ivy was already out of the car, head down, hurrying toward the door without looking at either of us. Brad barely glanced at her as she passed. "Go inside, start your homework." She didn't say goodbye to me, just disappeared into the house like a shadow. I stood on the sidewalk, engine still running behind me, and watched through the front window as Ivy sat down at the dining room table. She pulled out a workbook and bent over it, small and alone. Brad walked right past her, phone pressed to his ear, and didn't look at her once. Something twisted deep in my gut. Not suspicion exactly, more like the feeling you get when you walk into a room and sense that something's been moved, even though you can't tell what. "Everything okay with Ivy?" I called before Brad could close the door. He shrugged without turning around. "She's fine. Why wouldn't she be?" She seemed quiet. "She's 7. Kids get moody." He paused, one hand on the doorframe, and then added casually, too casually, like he'd been rehearsing it. "Hey, any chance you could send next year's payment early? Got some expenses coming up." Next year's payment. It was September. I never sent the money before January. What kind of expenses? House stuff. You know how it is. He still wasn't looking at me. His eyes were on his phone, thumb scrolling through something I couldn't see. "I'll think about it," I said, which was the first time in 7 years I hadn't immediately said yes. Something about the way he'd asked, the timing, the rehearsed casualness made the word yes stick in my throat. Brad noticed. His eyes flicked up from his phone, sharp and assessing, and for just a second I saw something underneath his usual indifference, irritation, maybe even anger. Then it was gone. smoothed over like a wrinkle in a bedsheet. Forget it, January's fine. The door closed. I got back in my car and sat there with the engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel until my arthritic knuckles screamed. My mind was doing something it hadn't done in 7 years. It was questioning things. Small things. Things I'd explained away or ignored or simply never noticed because grief had made me blind. $280,000. That's how much I'd given Brad since Willa died. And what did I have to show for it? No updates on Ivy's education, no photos from school events, no invitations to birthday parties or holiday dinners. Just a man who couldn't look his own daughter in the eye, asking me to send next year's money 4 months early. I drove home as the sky turned the color of a bruised purple and orange bleeding together over the Pennsylvania hills. The house was quiet when I walked in. It was always quiet. Some nights I still reached for Gloria in my sleep, my hand searching the cold sheets for a body that hadn't been there in nearly 7 years. Tonight, I didn't even try to sleep. I stood in front of Willa's urn instead. That brass box on the mantel, no bigger than a shoebox, that I'd treated like something sacred for 7 years. I'd talked to it, apologized to it, cried in front of it on anniversaries and holidays and random Tuesday nights when the loneliness got bad enough to make me forget for just a second that my daughter was inside it. Except I was starting to wonder if she was. Not consciously, not yet. The thought hadn't fully formed. It was more like a shadow at the edge of my vision, something I could sense but couldn't quite see. All I knew for certain was that my 7-year-old granddaughter had whispered a warning to me in a public park, and the fear in her eyes was real. Children don't fake fear like that. They don't have the practice. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak, every groan of old wood sounded like a question I couldn't answer. What did Ivy want me to see? What was Brad hiding? And why, after 7 years of blind faith, had I never once asked to see how my money was being spent? The questions kept coming, each one sharper than the last, each one peeling back a layer of trust I'd built up like scar tissue over a wound I thought had healed. But wounds don't heal when the thing that caused them is still there. They just get infected, they just get worse. And what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have imagined, even in my darkest moments, was that everything I believed about my daughter's death, about Brad, about the urn on my mantel and the ashes inside it, was about to come apart, not slowly, not gently, but all at once, like a building that's been rotting from the inside for years and finally collapses under its own weight. But that discovery was still ahead of me. That night, all I had was a grandfather's instinct and a little girl's frightened whisper. It would have to be enough. The night they told me Willow was dead replayed in my mind like a film reel I couldn't shut off. It had been doing that for 7 years, but now after Ivy's warning, the memory felt different. Sharper, like I was watching it with new eyes, noticing details I'd missed the first 1,000 times. March 15th, 2017, 3 in the morning. I was already half awake because Gloria had been restless beside me, tossing and turning the way she did when her mind wouldn't settle. She'd been worried about Willa lately, nothing specific, just the low-grade anxiety mothers carry like a second heartbeat. Willa had seemed distracted the last few times we'd talked on the phone. Shorter conversations, fewer laughs. Gloria had mentioned it over dinner that night, pushing her food around her plate. "Something's off with Willa," she'd said. "I can feel it." I'd told her she was overthinking. Told her Willa was fine, just busy with the baby, adjusting to motherhood, figuring out married life. The usual reassurances husbands give when they don't want to worry. Gloria had nodded but hadn't looked convinced. She never did when it came to Willa. Mothers know things. They feel the current change before anyone else sees the wave. The doorbell rang at 3:07. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on my nightstand, the way you do when a sound wakes you and your brain tries to calculate whether it's something you can ignore. 3:07 in the morning is never something you can ignore. 2 officers stood on the porch. The older one had gray at his temples and the carefully neutral expression cops learn to wear the way surgeons learn to wash their hands automatically, without thinking, because the alternative is feeling too much. The younger one couldn't manage it. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, and his eyes were red around the edges like he'd been crying recently, or trying very hard not to. "Mr. Harper?" The older one. "Yes." "Sir, there's been an accident on Route 9. Behind me, I heard Gloria's footsteps on the stairs. She'd heard the doorbell. Of course she had. She'd been half awake already. Antoinette tuned to the frequency of bad news the way they'd been all evening. Your daughter's vehicle went off the road. Vehicle, not car, not Willa's Honda, vehicle. The clinical distance of that word should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on the younger officer's face, on the way he was looking at me like I was something fragile, something already broken. She's at the hospital? I was reaching for my coat, already moving, already planning. Which hospital? St. Mary's, Regional. The older officer shook his head. Slow, deliberate. The kind of headshake that doesn't mean no so much as, I'm sorry for what I'm about to say. Sir, there was a fire. The vehicle was fully engulfed by the time emergency services arrived. Your son-in-law identified the remains from dental records. Gloria's knees buckled. I didn't see it. I was looking at the officer, but I heard it. The sound of her body hitting the floor behind me. A soft, terrible thump, like something essential had been cut loose inside her. The details arrived in fragments over the following days, each one a shard of glass I had to pick up and examine. Willa had been driving home late from visiting her best friend, Natalie Hughes, college roommate, maid of honor at the wedding, godmother to Ivy. They'd been inseparable for over a decade, the kind of friendship where they finished each other's sentences and had inside jokes nobody else understood. Willa had left Natalie's apartment around 11. The accident happened sometime before midnight. Car veered off Route 9 near mile marker 47, hit an oak tree, caught fire. They said the road was dry, the weather was clear. No other vehicles involved, no mechanical failures that could be determined from what was left. Just a car, a tree, and a fire that consumed everything. Brad was the one who got the call first. He told police he'd been home with Ivy when the hospital contacted him. He drove to the morgue, identified what was left, made the arrangements. By the time Gloria and I were coherent enough to ask questions, everything had already been handled. Brad was efficient that way, quiet, competent, steady in a crisis. At the time, I'd been grateful. He was holding things together while Gloria and I fell apart. Now I wondered if efficient was just another word for prepared. The funeral was on a Thursday. Gray sky, cold rain, the kind of March weather that made everything feel like penance. The church was packed. Willa had that effect on people. She collected friends the way some people collected books, generously and without pretense. Mrs. Patterson from the store came, old Joe Fletcher, half the neighborhood. Even people I didn't recognize, friends from college and work, people who'd loved my daughter in corners of her life I'd never seen. Brad stood beside me the entire service. Ivy was on his hip, 6 months old, chewing on her fist and blinking at the crowd with wide, bewildered eyes. He wore a dark suit I'd never seen before, and an expression I couldn't read, not grief exactly, not shock, more like concentration. Like he was performing a complex task and needed to get every step right. I told myself it was just his way of coping. Some people cry, some people organize. Brad organized. Natalie was there too. I remember that now, though at the time I barely registered it. She sat in the third row wearing black, mascara streaked, shredding a tissue in her lap. She'd given a reading something from Corinthians, the passage about love being patient. Her voice had broken halfway through, and someone in the front row had handed her water. Grief looked real on her. Sounded real. But then, I was learning that some people were better actors than I'd ever imagined. After the service, they handed us the urn. Simple brass, threaded cap, heavier than I expected. Gloria held it against her chest for the entire car ride home, rocking it gently, the way she'd once rocked Willa as an infant. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just held it and rocked and stared out the window at a world that had become unrecognizable in the span of 48 hours. We should scatter her ashes at the lake, Gloria said one morning about a week later. Her voice was hollow, not empty, but hollowed out, like something had been carved from the inside. Remember how much she loved Lake Rayburn? I remembered. Every summer of Willa's childhood had been spent at that lake. She'd learned to swim there at 5, caught her first fish at 7, kissed her first boyfriend under the dock at 15. Gloria and I had talked about selling the cabin once Willa left for college, but we never did. Couldn't bring ourselves to let go of a place that held so much of our daughter's laughter. We'll do it in the spring, I told Gloria. When the weather warms up, Willa would want sunshine. But spring never came for Gloria. Not really. The weeks after the funeral were a slow, terrible erosion, like watching a riverbank dissolve in heavy rain. She stopped cooking, stopped cleaning, stopped opening the curtains in the morning. She'd sit in Willa's old bedroom for hours, holding clothes our daughter had left behind during visits, pressing them to her face and breathing in whatever trace of Willa's perfume still clung to the fabric. I tried everything. I cooked her meals she didn't eat. I held her through nights she didn't sleep. I called the doctor, who prescribed pills that sat untouched in the medicine cabinet. I called our pastor, who came by twice and prayed with us in the living room, while Gloria stared at the urn on the mantel like it was the only thing in the room that mattered. "She's not getting better," I told the doctor on the phone one afternoon in August, 5 months after the funeral. "She's getting worse." "Grief takes time, Mr. Harper." "This isn't grief. This is something else. She's disappearing." Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Has she expressed any thoughts about harming herself?" "No." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure. Gloria hadn't expressed much of anything lately. She'd gone quiet in a way that frightened me more than crying ever could. I found her on September 3rd, a Tuesday morning. She was on the kitchen floor beside the coffee maker, the one Willa had given us 3 Christmases before, a fancy Italian thing with too many buttons that Gloria had loved because Willa had picked it out herself. The coffee was still brewing. The kitchen smelled like French roast and cinnamon. Gloria always added cinnamon to her coffee, said it reminded her of her mother's kitchen. The paramedics were kind. They told me it was quick, cardiac arrest, massive. She probably felt nothing. I nodded and thanked them and signed the papers they needed signed, and then I sat in my kitchen alone while the coffee maker beeped, telling me the cycle was complete. Cardiac arrest. That's what the death certificate said. But I knew the truth the way you know the sun will rise with absolute, unshakable certainty. Gloria died because Willa died. Her heart broke, and it kept breaking, every single day for 6 months, until there was nothing left to break. I buried my wife beside a headstone we'd never planned to need. White marble, beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts. The plot next to her was empty. We'd always assumed it would be mine someday. I hadn't imagined Gloria would get there first, hadn't imagined a lot of things. After that, the world contracted. My universe shrank to 3 fixed points: the store, the house, and Ivy. Everything else, friends, hobbies, the lake cabin, the future faded into background noise. I opened Harper Family Market at 6 every morning, stocked shelves, rang up customers, made small talk with people who looked at me with pity but had the decency not to say it out loud. Mrs. Patterson still came on Tuesdays for her tea. Old Joe Fletcher still came on Fridays for his lottery tickets. They asked how I was doing. I said fine. They knew I was lying. I knew they knew. Nobody pushed. The store saved me. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies where someone finds purpose and meaning and a reason to go on. It saved me the way a rope saves a drowning man. It gave me something to hold on to so the current didn't pull me under. Stocking shelves at 6 in the morning didn't fix the grief, but it gave my hands something to do besides reach for Gloria's side of the bed. Counting inventory at closing time didn't fill the silence at home, but it delayed my return to it. And every other Saturday, I picked up Ivy for ice cream. Those 2 hours with my granddaughter were the only time the world felt anything close to right. She had Willa's smile, that same sudden brightness, like someone had switched on a lamp behind her eyes. She had Willa's curiosity, too, asking questions about everything: why the sky was blue, why dogs couldn't talk, why Grandpa's hands were bumpy. I answered every one, patiently, thoroughly, the way Gloria had answered Willa's questions decades earlier. It was the closest thing to continuity I had left. Brad and I had settled into a rhythm that I mistook for normalcy. I sent the money every January. He acknowledged it with a text. I asked about Ivy. He gave one-word answers. I offered to help more take Ivy to school, attend her recitals, have her for weekends, and Brad always had a reason it wouldn't work. Ivy's schedule was too busy. She had activities. She needed routine. He made it sound reasonable, even protective, like he was putting Ivy's stability first. And I, desperate to believe the best about the man my daughter had married, accepted every excuse without question. There was one conversation, though, that I'd pushed to the back of my mind for years. It happened about 18 months after Willa died, during one of my Saturday drop-offs. Brad had been drinking. I could smell it on him, something sharp and amber, and his eyes had that slightly unfocused quality that told me it wasn't his first glass. Ivy was already inside. I'd lingered on the porch because something felt wrong, the same vague unease that would become a permanent fixture in my gut years later, though I didn't know it yet. You ever think about how different things would have been Brad had asked, leaning against the doorframe. His voice was loose, conversational, but there was an edge underneath it like a knife hidden in a folded napkin. Different how? If Willa hadn't taken that road, if she'd stayed home that night, if she'd never gone to Natalie's. He'd laughed a short, bitter sound. Funny how one decision changes everything. At the time, I'd taken it as grief talking. A widower replaying the what-ifs, torturing himself with alternate timelines where his wife was still alive. I'd put my hand on his shoulder and said something about God's plan, something hollow and well-intentioned that neither of us believed. But now, lying in bed after Ivy's warning at the park, that conversation took on a different shape, a colder shape. Brad hadn't been grieving, he'd been reflecting. And the bitterness in his laugh wasn't the bitterness of a man who'd lost his wife. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't name yet but could feel pressing against the walls of my understanding like water behind a dam. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I went through the motions at the store, smiled at customers, stocked shelves, made change, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. It was in the past, sifting through 7 years of memories, searching for the things I'd missed. And there were things I'd missed, more than I wanted to admit. Like the time, 3 years ago, when I'd stopped by Brad's house unannounced to drop off a birthday gift for Ivy. Brad hadn't answered the door. I'd waited on the porch for 10 minutes, called his phone, gotten voicemail. Eventually, I'd left the gift on the step with a note. Brad texted later that night. Sorry, was out running errands. Ivy loved the gift. But I'd seen his car in the driveway the entire time I was standing there. He'd been home. He just hadn't opened the door. Or the time Ivy had come to the park with a bruise on her forearm, small, round, the kind that could have come from a dozen innocent sources. I bumped the table, she'd said when I asked, and her voice had been flat, practiced, the way you sound when you've said something so many times it stops meaning anything. I'd let it go. Kids bumped into things. That was normal. But the flatness in her voice that wasn't normal, that was something else. Or the way Brad had started asking for the money earlier each year. November, then October, then September. This year, September again. Each time with a vague excuse: house repairs, school expenses, unexpected costs. And each time I'd said yes without asking for details, because questioning him felt like questioning Willa's memory. I'd been so careful to honor my promise to my daughter that I'd never stopped to ask whether the man I was trusting to keep it was worthy of that trust. Standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m, surrounded by silence and the ghosts of 2 women I'd loved and lost, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, no fist on the table, no vow of vengeance. Just a quiet, tired resolution that settled into my bones like November cold. I was going to find out what Brad was hiding. I was going to find out why Ivy was afraid. And I was going to do it not because I wanted revenge or justice or any of those big, clean words that sound good in stories. I was going to do it because a 7-year-old girl had trusted me with her fear, and I'd already spent 7 years failing the people who needed me most. I wasn't going to fail again. The next morning, I saw the woman who would change everything. Tuesday mornings at Harper Family Market followed a rhythm as predictable as a heartbeat. Mrs. Patterson at 7 for her tea, old Joe Fletcher at 8 for lottery tickets and spearmint gum. A brief rush at 9 coffee and muffins for the commuters. By 9:15, the store usually settled into its mid-morning quiet, just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft creak of shelves that had been standing since my father built them. She walked in at 9:17. I noticed her immediately, not because strangers were unusual, they came in occasionally, passing through on their way to somewhere else, but because something about her triggered a response I couldn't explain. A tug at the base of my skull, a flicker of recognition that disappeared the moment I tried to focus on it. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a low ponytail, thin, not healthy thin, more like she'd been thin for so long her body had forgotten any other shape. She wore jeans and an expensive-looking leather jacket, brown with silver zippers, that didn't match the rest of her, the tired eyes, the careful way she moved, like someone used to making herself small. The jacket was armor. Everything else was exhaustion. She went straight to the coffee aisle, didn't browse, didn't wander, picked up a bag of ground coffee and a small jar of cinnamon and brought them to the counter. "That all for you?" I asked, ringing her up. My knuckles ached as I pressed the register keys. I'd already dropped a roll of quarters that morning. Yes, clipped, not rude, distant, the voice of someone who'd practiced not being noticed. She handed me a 20 without making eye contact. I counted back her change. She took it, turned to leave. And then something happened that I still can't fully explain. She passed within 3 feet of me on her way to the door, and the air shifted not literally, not physically, but something in the space between us changed, like a frequency adjusting, like a radio dial clicking one notch to the right. She moved a certain way, tilted her head at a certain angle, and for one disorienting second, I was 20 years in the past, watching my daughter walk out of this same store after helping me close up on a Saturday night. "Ma'am," I called. She stopped, turned. Her expression was guarded, not startled, not curious, but watchful, the way prey animals look at movement. "Have we met before?" "I don't think so." "You remind me of someone." Something passed across her face quick, almost imperceptible, like a shadow moving behind a curtain. "I get that a lot." She pushed through the door and was gone. I stood behind the register, staring at the spot where she'd been, trying to catch the thread of recognition before it dissolved completely. The harder I reached for it, the faster it slipped away. 20 minutes later, I stepped outside to bring in the sandwich board, and there she was again across the street, standing beside a silver sedan, and she wasn't alone. Brad was with her. They were talking. Brad leaned against the car with an ease I hadn't seen in him for years, shoulders relaxed, one hand in his pocket, smiling at something she'd said. She touched his arm, brief, familiar, the kind of touch that comes from practice, and then got into the driver's seat. Brad walked around and climbed into the passenger side. The sedan pulled away down 5th Street and disappeared around the corner. I stood on the sidewalk holding a sandwich board I'd forgotten existed, watching the empty space where the car had been, and felt the first crack spread through 7 years of carefully constructed trust. Who was she? Why was Brad meeting her here, outside my store? And why this was the question that wouldn't let go, the one that burrowed into my brain and set up camp. Why had she bought coffee and cinnamon? Just those 2 items, nothing else. Coffee and cinnamon. The combination unsettled me in a way I couldn't articulate. It sat in my stomach like something spoiled, and I didn't yet understand why. But I would. God help me, I would. I called Roger Stevens that afternoon, didn't even debate it, just picked up my phone, found his name, and typed 3 words, "Need to talk, store." Roger had been my closest friend for 40 years, ever since our daughters ended up in the same kindergarten class, and we'd bonded over bad coffee at a PTA meeting neither of us wanted to attend. He'd spent 30 years as a detective with the county police homicides, fraud, missing persons, the kind of cases that teach you to see the lies hiding behind polite smiles. He'd retired 5 years ago, but retirement hadn't softened him. He still carried a notebook in his back pocket, still watched people the way a hawk watches a field patient, focused, missing nothing. He walked into Harper Family Market 23 minutes after my text. Gray haircut, military short, flannel shirt, reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. 67 years old and still moved like a man who'd chase suspects through back alleys for a living. "You look like hell," he said. "Thanks, Roger." He glanced around the empty store. I'd flipped the closed sign without thinking about it, the first time in 35 years I'd shut down during business hours for anything short of a funeral. Must be serious. He pulled up a stool behind the counter and settled onto it the way he settled into everything completely, like he'd already decided he wasn't leaving until the job was done. "What's going on?" I started with Ivy, the park, the whisper, the fear in her eyes when she gripped my sleeve and said, "Please stop sending him money." Roger didn't interrupt. He pulled out his notebook, small, leather-bound, the same kind he'd carried for 3 decades, and started writing, not rushing, just capturing details with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood that truth lives in specifics. Then I told him about the woman, the dark hair, the leather jacket, coffee and cinnamon, the way she'd avoided my eyes, the flicker of something when I'd said she reminded me of someone, and then seeing her 20 minutes later, across the street, getting into a car with Brad. Roger's pen stopped moving. "You get a plate number?" "No," I was too surprised. "Description of the vehicle?" "Silver sedan. Honda or Toyota maybe." I wasn't paying attention to the car. "Height, weight, distinguishing features on the woman?" I closed my eyes, trying to reassemble her from fragments. 5'6", 5'7", thin, dark hair in a ponytail, mid-30s. The leather jacket was brown with silver zippers. Expensive looking, didn't match the rest of her. "What do you mean didn't match?" She looked tired, worn down, but the jacket was new, like someone else bought it for her. Roger made a note. And she reminded you of someone. Yeah, but I can't place it. It's like trying to remember a word that's sitting right on the tip of your tongue. He tapped his pen against the page, thinking, Brad's never mentioned a woman. Never. After Willa died, he said he dated a little. Nothing serious. Never introduced anyone to me or Ivy. But you've been giving him $40,000 a year. For 7 years. Roger's tone was neutral, deliberately. Carefully neutral, the way he got when he was building a case in his head. For Ivy, I said. The money's for Ivy. Right. He set his pen down and looked at me with eyes that had spent 30 years separating truth from performance. Stephen, when's the last time Brad gave you any kind of update on how that money's being used? The question hit harder than it should have. I opened my mouth to answer and found nothing. No receipts, no reports. No photos of new clothes or school supplies or the things $40,000 a year should buy for a child. Just silence, year after year, broken only by texts so brief they barely qualified as communication. He's raising a daughter alone, I said. But the defense sounded thin even to me. And Ivy told you to stop sending money and to watch her father. Roger leaned forward on the stool, elbows on his knees. 7-year-olds don't say things like that, Stephen. They don't whisper warnings in parks unless something is genuinely wrong. Kids that age don't have the imagination for conspiracy. If Ivy's scared, there's a reason. The words settled over me like a weight. I'd been telling myself for days that maybe Ivy was confused, maybe she'd overheard something she didn't understand, maybe I was reading too much into a child's offhand comment. Roger had just dismantled every one of those excuses in 30 seconds. What do you want me to do? He asked. I need to know what's going on. I need to know if Ivy's safe. If Brad is, I don't know, doing something he shouldn't be. You want surveillance. The word felt heavy, final, like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. Is it legal? On a public street, watching someone's comings and goings from outside their property? He shrugged. Not illegal. Then yes. Roger studied me for a long moment. You understand what this means. If we find something, you can't unknow it. And if we don't find anything, you just spent days spying on your son-in-law for nothing. Either way, the relationship changes. The relationship changed when Ivy grabbed my sleeve at that park. He nodded slowly, stood up, tucked the notebook back into his pocket. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m, I'll bring the equipment. We park down the street from Brad's place and we watch. And if we find nothing, then you sleep better knowing Ivy's fine. He paused at the door. But I've been doing this a long time, Stephen. 40 years of reading people. And my gut's telling me we're going to find something. Mine was too. That was the problem. That evening, I did something I should have done years ago. I spread 7 years of bank statements across my kitchen table and forced myself to look at what I'd been avoiding. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of old wood settling. I'd made coffee strong, black, the way Gloria used to make it during our late-night sessions doing taxes or planning Willa's college fund. The mug sat beside me untouched, steam curling into the dim light above the table. January 2018, Bon Mui, không wired to Bradley Wallace. Memo, family support. January 2019, same amount, same memo. 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. 7 identical transactions, 7 years of faith converted into numbers on a page. $280,000. I'd known the total, of course. I'd written the checks, authorized the transfers, but seeing it laid out chronologically, 7 lines, 7 years, 7 acts of trust, made it concrete in a way that squeezed the air from my lungs. That was more money than most people in this town earned in a decade. Money I'd pulled from a business I'd built with my hands and my father's legacy. Money I'd given freely, without conditions, without receipts, without once asking to see where it went. I pulled out a shoebox from the hall closet, the one where I kept correspondence and paperwork related to Brad and Ivy. 7 years of documents. I sorted through everything, looking for proof that the money had been used properly. Proof of gratitude. Proof of anything. What I found was absence. No thank you notes. No updates on Ivy's education. No photos from birthday parties or school events. No receipts showing how a single dollar had been spent. The only communications were text messages. And they told a story of their own, a story of slow, deliberate withdrawal. January Hangin le mui chin. Got the transfer. Thanks. Hangin le hai mui. Received. Appreciated. By hangin le hai mui mot, it was down to, transfer came through. By hangin le hai mui ba, just a thumbs up emoji. Not even words anymore. Just a yellow digital thumb, acknowledging a $250,000 gift, the way you'd acknowledge someone holding a door. I scrolled through our entire text history. Hundreds of messages over 7 years, and nearly all of them were initiated by me. I'd ask how Ivy was doing. Fine. Could I take her to the park this weekend? Sure. Did she need winter clothes? We're good. Never details, never stories. Never the casual, messy overflow of information that families share without thinking the funny thing Ivy said at dinner, the project she was working on at school, the friend she'd made, or the tooth she'd lost. Just the bare minimum. Just enough to keep me from asking harder questions. And then there was the pattern I'd never noticed until tonight, probably because I'd never laid everything out side by side. Every year, without exception, Brad texted me in November or early December, asking if I could send the payment early. November hangin le mui chin, expenses before Christmas. December hangin le hai mui, house repairs. November hangin le hai mui mot, Ivy's school stuff. Always vague. Always urgent. Always just persuasive enough that I'd wire the money without pressing for specifics. What kind of expenses materialized every single year at exactly the same time? And why did a man receiving $40,000 annually need it weeks early? What was he spending it on that couldn't wait? I opened my laptop and pulled up Brad's social media. His Facebook was sparse privacy settings locked tight, just a few visible photos of Ivy from years ago and some posts about sports teams. But one detail jumped out at me. His relationship status had changed 2 years ago, from widowed to in a relationship. Then, 6 months later, back to blank. He'd never mentioned dating anyone, never said a word. The woman from the store surfaced in my mind. Coffee and cinnamon, the touch on Brad's arm, the easy familiarity between them. Was she the relationship that had appeared and disappeared from his profile? Or someone new? I pulled out a legal pad and started writing, not because I knew what I was looking for, but because Roger had taught me years ago that patterns reveal themselves when you put things on paper. I wrote down everything: the early payment requests, the minimal communication, the lockdown social media, the relationship status change, the mystery woman, Ivy's warning. Then I wrote questions underneath. Where was the hai cham tam mui hum going? Who was the woman? Why did Ivy want me to stop sending money? What was Ivy afraid of? I stared at the list. 4 questions. 7 years of answers I should have demanded, but didn't. After organizing everything into a folder for Roger, I walked into the living room. Willa's urn sat on the mantel where it had always been, flanked by photos Willa and Gloria and me at Lake Rayburn the summer before the accident. All of us laughing, all of us ignorant of what was coming. I picked up the photo and studied Gloria's face, the way her arm wrapped around Willa's shoulders, the unguarded joy in her expression. She'd been so alive that day. I'm trying, I said to the photo. I'm trying to do right by Ivy. I just don't know if I've been doing it the right way. The house answered with silence. I set the folder by the front door so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. Then I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark street, my reflection ghostly in the glass. An old man with swollen knuckles and bags under his eyes, and a growing suspicion that the last 7 years of his life had been built on sand. Tomorrow at 6, Roger and I would start watching, start looking for answers to questions I should have asked the day they handed me that urn. I should have felt guilty, should have felt like I was betraying Brad's trust, going behind the back of the man my daughter had loved. But all I felt was the cold, steady weight of determination settling into my chest like an anchor. Ivy had asked me to watch. She'd trusted me with her fear. And for 7 years, I'd been too lost in my own grief to see what was right in front of me. A granddaughter who needed me, a son-in-law who was hiding something, and an urn on my mantel that I'd never once thought to open. I wouldn't fail her anymore. I couldn't. Roger arrived at 5:30 the next morning. I was already dressed, standing in the kitchen with cold coffee, staring at the folder of bank statements like they might rearrange themselves into an explanation if I looked hard enough. Didn't sleep, Roger observed, hauling 2 black duffel bags through the front door. Figured. He set them on the kitchen table and unzipped the larger one. Inside was equipment I recognized from crime shows, but had never seen in-person: cameras with telephoto lenses, a digital recorder, binoculars, a laptop, and several small devices I couldn't identify. We parked down the street from Brad's house, Roger said, assembling a camera with the practiced speed of muscle memory. Public road, legal surveillance, 2 old guys in a car drinking coffee. Nothing suspicious about that. What are we looking for? Patterns. Who comes and goes? When Brad leaves, when he comes home, whether your mystery woman shows up. We track his routine and look for cracks. He lifted the camera, checked the lens, and maybe we learn where $280,000 went. We drove to Maple Street in Roger's gray sedan, the kind of car so aggressively ordinary it could park anywhere without drawing a glance. He positioned us 3 houses down from Brad's place, far enough to avoid notice, close enough to see the driveway and front door clearly through the telephoto lens. Then we waited. Brad left at 7:45, backed out of the driveway, turned left toward the main road, disappeared. Roger noted the time. What's his job? He asked. Construction management, I think. Haven't asked in years. Roger nodded but didn't comment. The silence said enough. The first day gave us nothing. Brad left at 7:45, returned at 6, a normal pattern, a normal life. Roger went home in the afternoon. I stayed, watching the house, glancing at Ivy's upstairs window and hoping she was all right. The second day repeated the pattern, same departure, same return. I was starting to wonder if I was chasing phantoms, if grief and loneliness had turned me into the kind of old man who saw conspiracies in ordinary silences. Then, late afternoon on day 2, the silver sedan appeared. It turned onto Maple Street at 2:30 and pulled directly into Brad's driveway. The woman from the store, dark hair, leather jacket, got out, walked to the front door, and let herself in with a key. She had a key. I called Roger immediately. He arrived 20 minutes later with the telephoto lens and started shooting photos through the windshield. Through the living room window, we could see them on the couch. Brad's arm along the back, the woman leaning close. Their body language wasn't casual, it was intimate, comfortable, the language of 2 people who had done this many times before. Who is she? I asked, though I knew Roger didn't have the answer yet. When did Brad last mention dating anyone? He hasn't, not once. She stayed 2 hours. When she left, Brad walked her to the car. They stood in the driveway talking, her hand on his chest, his hand at her waist. Then she drove off, and Roger wrote down her license plate number in his notebook, circled it twice, and underlined it. The third day, she came back. Same time, same routine, stayed an hour, left. That weekend, when I took Ivy for ice cream, Brad said nothing about her, nothing about dating. Acted like everything was the same as it had always been. By day 4, Roger and I had Brad's schedule mapped. Up at 7, gone by 7:45, home by 6. The woman visited every other afternoon. But on the 4th morning, everything shifted. Brad left at 10 a.m., 2 hours late. That's new, I said. Roger started the engine without hesitation. Let's see where he goes. We followed at a distance 2 car lengths, sometimes 3, enough to stay invisible in traffic. Brad drove past the store, past the neighborhoods I knew, into the industrial district on the east side of town, warehouses, loading docks, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, the kind of area that emptied out after business hours and stayed empty. Brad turned onto East Industrial Avenue and pulled into a cracked parking lot fronting a large brick warehouse, building Bonchambonwe Bay, narrow windows sealed with grime, a rusted side entrance, almost no other cars. He parked near the entrance and went inside. Roger stopped across the street behind a delivery truck, cut the engine, raised the camera. What is this place? I asked. Roger was already searching on his phone. Warehouse, owned by a holding company, listed as storage and light manufacturing. No active business registered at this address. He looked up. Why would Brad be here? That's what we need to find out. We waited. 45 minutes passed before Brad emerged, got in his car, and drove away. We didn't follow. Roger was staring at the building with the expression I'd seen him wear 100 times over 40 years of friendship, the look of a man who'd found the thread and was deciding how hard to pull. There's something in there, I said. Yeah. Roger lowered the camera. There is. He wrote down the address, circled it, and drew a line connecting it to the woman's license plate number on the previous page. We come back, he said. Watch this place the way we watched his house. For how long? As long as it takes. The next time we returned to that warehouse, we brought better equipment and longer patience. And what we discovered inside those walls, what I heard through a cracked window on a cold evening while Roger gripped my arm to keep me from breaking down the door, was a sound I will carry with me for the rest of my life. A woman crying, pleading, and through the sobs, 5 words that shattered every remaining piece of the reality I'd built over 7 years. I've been here so long. Roger's hand tightened on my shoulder. In his other hand, his phone was already recording. And in my chest, something that had been sleeping for 7 years, woke up not grief this time, not sorrow, but a fury so deep and so clean it felt almost holy. Someone was in that warehouse, someone who wasn't there by choice, and Brad, the man I'd trusted, the man I'd paid, the man I'd called family, was the one keeping her there. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. I paced through my house like a trapped animal, wearing a path between the kitchen and the living room, replaying that sound over and over, the crying, the pleading, those 5 words that had cracked my world open like an egg dropped on concrete. I've been here so long. A woman's voice, muffled by brick and glass and years of silence, but unmistakable. Someone was living inside that warehouse. Someone who sounded broken in a way that went beyond sadness, beyond exhaustion, into a territory I didn't have a word for. The kind of broken that happens when hope has been dead so long you've forgotten what it felt like. Roger had pulled me away from the window before I could do something stupid, his hand on my arm, firm and unyielding. Not now. Not like this. He'd recorded everything, 3 minutes and 47 seconds of audio captured through a cracked window on the 2nd floor of building Bonchum Bonmui Bay. A woman crying. A woman begging someone who wasn't there to let her go. And then silence. The kind that felt worse than the crying because it meant she'd given up again. We'd driven home without speaking. Roger dropped me off and told me he'd be back at 7 with information. Don't call Brad, he said. Don't go back to the warehouse. Don't do anything until I get here. His voice was the detective voice, calm, controlled, the voice of a man who'd spent decades managing chaos. I nodded, went inside, stood in my dark kitchen with my hands shaking and my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Who was in that warehouse? The questions spiraled through my mind, generating answers I couldn't bear to consider and couldn't stop considering. A stranger? Someone Brad owed money to? Someone he'd hurt? Or someone I knew? The thought surfaced like a body rising from deep water, slow, inevitable, horrifying. I pushed it down, told myself I was being irrational, told myself grief and sleeplessness were making me see connections that didn't exist, but the thought kept coming back, kept breaking the surface no matter how many times I shoved it under. The woman at the store, coffee and cinnamon, the way she'd tilted her head, the flicker of something familiar in her posture. I've been here so long. 7 years. The woman in the warehouse had been there for years. And 7 years ago my daughter had supposedly died in a car fire en route Chin. No, it wasn't possible. I'd been to the funeral. I'd held the urn. I'd mourned for 7 years, and Gloria had died of grief, and the whole town had watched us bury our daughter. You don't fake something like that. You don't erase a person from existence and replace them with coffee grounds in a brass box and expect nobody to notice. Except nobody had noticed. Not me, not Gloria, not a single person in 7 years. By the time Roger knocked on my door at 7 the next morning, I'd been awake for 22 straight hours and had made a decision I hadn't told anyone about yet. I was going to open that urn, tonight. No matter what Roger's information revealed. 7 years, I'd kept that brass box sealed, because opening it felt like losing Willa all over again. But now, it felt like the opposite. Now it felt like the only way to find her. Roger came in carrying his laptop bag and the expression of a man who'd been up most of the night himself. He set the laptop on my kitchen table, opened it, and then looked at me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Stephen, sit down for this. Just tell me. Sit, please." I sat. Roger pulled up a video file and angled the screen toward me. I still have contacts on the force. One of them accessed public security footage, traffic cameras around the warehouse district. Completely legal, all public record. He paused. This was captured 3 days ago. He pressed play. Black and white footage, grainy, the kind used on traffic monitoring systems. A wide shot of East Industrial Avenue cars passing, a delivery truck, nothing unusual. Then a figure entered the frame from the left, walking along the sidewalk toward the warehouse. A woman, thin, dark hair pulled back, moving with a gait that was simultaneously cautious and familiar, like someone who knew this route by heart but still checked over her shoulder every few steps. Roger paused the video as the woman's face turned partially toward the camera. The image wasn't sharp, but it didn't need to be. The shape of her cheekbones, the slight asymmetry of her nose broken in a volleyball game junior year, the way her head tilted when she walked, just slightly to the left, a habit Willa had carried since childhood because she'd had recurring ear infections that affected her balance. I knew that tilt. I'd watched it for 26 years. No, I whispered. Roger opened a second window on the laptop, 2 images, side by side. On the left, Willa's driver's license photo from hanging Lamwer by younger, smiling, hair lighter, eyes bright with the casual confidence of someone who believed the world was mostly good. On the right, a still frame pulled from the surveillance footage older, hollowed out, hair darker, eyes that had forgotten what confidence felt like. But the same face, changed by time and suffering, but unmistakably, undeniably the same. 97% match on facial recognition, Roger said quietly. Stephen, that's Willa. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles white, arthritic fingers screaming in protest, and I held on because letting go meant falling into something I wasn't sure I'd come back from. She's dead. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. We buried her. We had a funeral. We cremated. You had a closed casket funeral, Roger said gently. You cremated someone, but you never saw a body. Brad identified the remains. Brad handled everything. He paused. And the urn has been sitting on your mantel for 7 years, and you've never opened it. The urn. I was on my feet before I'd consciously decided to move. Roger called after me, Stephen, wait. But I was already in the living room, already reaching for the brass box on the mantel, already gripping it with hands that shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it under the overhead light. The lid was a simple threaded cap, the kind you unscrew with your hands. For 7 years, that cap had stayed sealed, not because it was difficult to open, but because I'd been afraid of what opening it meant. Afraid that touching the ashes would make Willa's death more real than the closed casket and the memorial service and the headstone with her name on it. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was something far worse than afraid. Forgive me, Willa, I said, and twisted. The lid came off easily, too easily, like it had never been properly sealed in the first place, or like someone had opened it before and hadn't bothered to tighten it afterward. Inside was a clear plastic bag tied with a twist tie. Through the plastic, I could see dark powder almost black in the harsh kitchen light. It looked like ash. Looked exactly like what you'd expect cremated remains to look like if you'd never seen cremated remains before and had no reason to question what you were seeing. I untied the bag, reached in, let the powder run through my fingers. It was wrong. The texture was wrong, too coarse, too granular. Cremated remains have a specific consistency, somewhere between powder and sand, with fragments of calcium and bone that your fingers can distinguish from everything else. This wasn't that. This was rough, uneven, familiar in a way that made my stomach lurch. Then I smelled it. Coffee. Not the faint, sterile nothing of ash, not the chemical residue of cremation. Coffee rich, dark, unmistakable. The same smell that filled my store every morning when I opened a fresh bag of grounds, and underneath it, woven through it like thread through fabric, something sweet and spicy. Cinnamon. The kitchen tilted. I gripped the table to steady myself and felt Roger's hand on my shoulder, but I couldn't look at him. I could only stare at the powder on my fingers, coffee grounds and cinnamon, the contents of my daughter's sacred urn, the ashes my wife had kissed and wept over and held against her chest in the car ride home from the funeral. I dumped the bag onto the table. Brown powder spilled out in a heap, darker in some spots, lighter in others. I sifted through it with fingers that no longer trembled because they'd gone past trembling into some frozen state beyond it. I searched for bone fragments, for calcium, for anything that said human instead of grocery aisle. There was nothing, just coffee grounds and reddish-brown flecks I recognized from 35 years of stocking spice shelves. I touched one of the flecks to my tongue. Sweet, warm, cinnamon. Gloria had stood in this room. She'd held this urn against her heart and whispered goodbye to our daughter. She'd spent 6 months dying of grief over what she believed were Willa's remains, and it was kitchen scraps, a mixture someone had thrown together from a coffee bag and a spice jar and poured into a brass box, knowing that a grieving family would never think to check. The rage came so fast and so hard it felt like a physical blow, like something inside me detonated, sending shrapnel through every soft place I had left. I swept my arm across the table. The urn hit the floor with a hollow, mocking ring brass on tile, empty as the lies it had held. Coffee grounds scattered across the kitchen like evidence at a crime scene, which is exactly what they were. "Damn you!" I shouted. At Brad, at Natalie, at whoever had filled that urn, and sealed it, and handed it to my wife with a straight face. "Damn you!" Roger let me rage. He stood by the counter with his arms crossed, and let me shout and pace and slam my hands against the table until the arthritis screamed loud enough to cut through the adrenaline. Then, when I'd burned through the worst of it, and stood bent over the table gasping like I'd run a marathon, he spoke. "Stephen, listen to me." I looked up. The urn is fake, which means the funeral was fake, which means the body they cremated wasn't Willa. His voice was steady, deliberate, each sentence laid down like a brick in a wall. "And if the body wasn't Willa, then the woman on that surveillance footage, the woman in that warehouse, is your daughter, and she's alive." The words should have brought relief, joy, gratitude. Instead, they brought grief a second wave, different from the first, more terrible because it carried the weight of understanding. 7 years. 7 years Gloria and I could have spent with our daughter. 7 years of birthday parties and holidays and Sunday dinners and all the mundane, precious, irreplaceable moments that make up a life. 7 years, Ivy could have had a mother. And Gloria. Gloria had died, believing Willa was gone. Had died of a broken heart that never needed to break. Had spent her last 6 months in agony over ashes that weren't ashes, mourning a death that never happened, while her daughter, alive, breathing, imprisoned, sat in a warehouse 12 miles away. "Gloria died for nothing," I said. The words came out flat, drained. "She died because they lied to us. She died because I never checked. She died because Brad wanted her to believe the lie," Roger said firmly. "Don't put that on yourself. Put it where it belongs. I paid him $280,000. The number sounded obscene now. Grotesque. I paid the man who locked up my daughter. I funded her imprisonment. You were deceived, deliberately, systematically, for 7 years, by people who planned this." Roger moved closer. "Stephen, this wasn't carelessness. This was a conspiracy. Brad, Natalie, whoever helped them, they constructed this lie knowing exactly what it would do to your family. They counted on your grief to blind you. And it worked, because that's what grief does. It's not a character flaw, it's human." I looked at the coffee grounds scattered across my table, at the urn lying on its side on the floor, at the photo of Gloria on the counter, the one from Lake Rayburn, all of us smiling, all of us believing we had more time. "We need to get her out," I said. "Tonight, right now." "Not yet. She's alive, Roger. She's in that warehouse. She's been there for 7 years, and every minute we wait. And if we rush in without knowing everything, we could make it worse." Roger's voice hardened, not cruel firm. The voice of a man who'd spent decades learning that the fastest path to justice wasn't always the straightest one. "We don't know who else is involved. We don't know what Brad has told her, what he's holding over her, why she stayed. If she's been there for 7 years and hasn't left, there's a reason. We need to understand that reason before we act. The reason is she's locked in. Maybe, or maybe he's convinced her she has to stay. Maybe he's told her something that makes her believe leaving would be worse." Roger met my eyes. "Your daughter is smart, Stephen. She always was. If she's been in that building for 7 years, it's not because she can't pick a lock. It's because something in her mind is holding her there. And if we break down that door without understanding what it is, we could push her further into whatever Brad's built around her." I hated that he was right. Hated it with every fiber of my being. But he was right, and I knew it, and knowing it was its own kind of torture. So what do? We approach her, carefully, away from Brad. The footage shows she leaves the warehouse briefly some afternoons, maybe to get air, maybe for supplies. If we can identify her routine, we approach her then, talk to her, find out what she knows, what she believes, what Brad's told her. And then we get her out, safely, permanently, and we make sure Brad pays for every single day he kept her there. I looked at Willa's urn on the floor, at the coffee grounds and cinnamon dusting my kitchen like the remnants of some terrible joke. My wife had died holding that urn. My daughter had been alive the entire time. And the man responsible had stood at the funeral, accepted condolences, taken my money, and lived his life like none of it mattered. When? I asked. Soon. We watch the warehouse tomorrow. Map her movements. Find the right moment. Roger put his hand on my shoulder, the same gesture he'd used 100 times, over 40 years, in hospital waiting rooms, and at gravesides, and on the night Gloria died. We're close, Stephen, but close isn't there yet. One more day of patience. Can you give me that? One more day. After 7 years, what was one more day? Everything. It was everything. Because now I knew she was alive, and every second she spent in that building was a second I felt in my own body like a wound. But I nodded. Because Roger was right, and because patience, real patience, the kind that hurts, was the only weapon I had left. One more day, I said. Roger squeezed my shoulder and left. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of 7 years of lies, coffee grounds on the floor, an empty urn, bank statements in a folder, and a photograph of my wife smiling at a camera she didn't know was capturing one of her last happy moments. I picked up the photo, held it close. She's alive, Gloria, I whispered. Our girl is alive, and I'm going to bring her home. But I couldn't wait one more day. I knew that even as I said the words to Roger, even as I nodded and agreed and watched him drive away, I couldn't go home and lie in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing my daughter was 12 miles away, in a concrete prison, while I did nothing. 7 years of inaction had already cost me everything: my wife, my money, my granddaughter's childhood. I wasn't going to add another night to the ledger. So at 9 o'clock, I got in my car. I didn't call Roger, didn't tell him I was going. Just drove through the quiet streets, past the store, past the neighborhoods I knew by heart, into the industrial district, where the streetlights grew sparse and the buildings grew dark. East Industrial Avenue stretched out ahead of me like a road into somewhere you weren't supposed to go. Building Bonchambonwebay. I pulled into the lot and killed the engine and sat there in the dark, staring at the sealed windows and the rusted entrance and the single light burning in an upper window. My daughter was behind those walls. 7 years of her life had been spent inside this building while I mourned her and paid her captor and never once asked the questions that might have saved her. I was reaching for the door handle when someone knocked on my window. Roger. He was standing beside the car, arms crossed, expression somewhere between exasperation and resignation. I rolled down the window. Couldn't sleep either, I said. I figured you'd do something stupid. He wasn't smiling. If we're doing this, we do it my way. We go in, we stay calm, we listen. Whatever she says, whatever we find, we listen first. Got it? Got it. I mean it, Stephen, no matter what. I got out of the car. The warehouse loomed above us, dark and silent, except for that single light. The kind of building that looked wrong at night, too still, too empty, like something pretending to be abandoned while holding a secret inside. We crossed the street together, the side entrance Brad always used. Roger tried the handle, it turned. Unlocked, he said, and something crossed his face, not surprise exactly, but confirmation. Like an unlocked door fit a theory he'd been building in his head. He pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The warehouse was bigger than I expected, and colder than anywhere should be in September. High ceilings lost in shadow, industrial shelving stretching into darkness. The smell of concrete and dust, and something else, something human. The smell of someone living in a place not designed for living. We moved toward the light. Past shelving units stacked with boxes. Past old equipment and forgotten inventory, and the accumulated debris of a building that had outlived its purpose. And then, in the far corner, the debris ended, and something else began. Someone had built a life back here. A terrible, minimal, barely surviving life, but a life nonetheless. A twin bed with blankets worn thin from years of washing. A card table with a hot plate and a jar of instant coffee and plastic spoons. Clothes hanging from a wire strung between 2 metal posts. 1 folding chair. 1 battery-powered lamp casting weak yellow light across concrete floors. And photos, taped to the wall above the bed, arranged with the careful precision of someone who had nothing else to be careful about. Photos of Ivy. Every school picture I'd sent Brad over the years. Every birthday photo. The one from the park last summer where she'd lost her front tooth and grinned at the camera like the gap was a trophy. They were here, on this wall, in this prison. She was sitting on the bed, staring at those photos when we walked in, and when the door creaked and she turned to face us, 7 years collapsed into a single second. My daughter looked at me with eyes I'd mourned and missed and dreamed about, and all I could think was how much of her was gone. She was so thin. That was the first thing that registered, not the recognition, not the shock, not the 7 years crashing together like waves against a seawall. The thinness. Willa had always been slender, but this wasn't slender. This was erosion. Cheekbones too sharp beneath skin that hadn't seen proper sunlight in years. Wrists like a child's, disappearing into the cuffs of a faded sweatshirt that hung from her frame like it belonged to someone twice her size. Her hair was darker than I remembered, longer, pulled back in a loose ponytail that made her look both older and younger at the same time, older in the way suffering ages people, younger in the way vulnerability strips everything back to the essential. But her eyes. God, her eyes. They were Willa's eyes, the same shape, the same dark brown that Gloria always said looked like coffee in sunlight. Except the light behind them was gone. Not dimmed, gone. Replaced by something flat and watchful, the expression of a person who has learned that every sound could be a threat, and every moment of calm is just the pause before the next blow. Dad. One word, barely a whisper. And my entire body seized muscles, lungs, heart, all of it locking in place because that voice, that single syllable, was the voice of my dead daughter, calling me from across 7 years of grief and lies and a grave that had never held her body. Then the rage took over. How could you? It came out louder than I intended, harsher, fueled by 7 years of mourning, of watching Gloria waste away, of standing at an empty grave talking to a headstone that marked nothing. How could you do this to us? Willa flinched. Not a small flinch, her whole body recoiled against the wall like I'd raised my hand instead of my voice. The reaction was instinctive, practiced, the kind of flinch that comes from years of associating raised voices with danger. Something in my chest cracked at the sight of it, but the anger was too strong to stop. I can explain, she said. Her voice was raw, scraped thin. Explain? Your mother died, Willa. Your mother. I took a step toward her. She pressed harder against the wall. She died thinking you were gone. She cried every single day for 6 months. Every single day. I watched her disappear. Watched her stop eating, stop sleeping, stop living. And I couldn't help her because our daughter was dead. I heard my own voice cracking but couldn't control it. The words were coming from somewhere deeper than thought, from the place where grief had lived for 7 years, rotting, festering, turning into something toxic I didn't know was there until this moment. Except you weren't dead. You were here, 12 miles away. You were here the whole time. Willa was crying now. Not the controlled, dignified tears of someone defending themselves. Deep, shaking sobs that bent her double, that slid her down the wall until she hit the concrete floor and sat there with her arms wrapped around her knees, face hidden, body trembling. I never wanted any of this, she said into her knees. I never wanted. Then why? I was almost shouting. Couldn't stop. 7 years of pain had found an exit, and it was pouring out in a torrent I couldn't dam. Why did you let us bury a stranger? Why did you let me pay Brad $280,000? Why did you let your mother die of a broken heart when one single phone call could have saved her? Roger stepped between us, physically placed himself in the gap, one hand on my chest, the other raised toward Willa in a gesture that said, "Stay. I'll handle this. Stephen, stop. She needs to explain. And she will, but not like this." His voice was the detective voice, again calm, immovable. "Look at her." I looked, really looked, the way you look at something when the anger recedes enough for your eyes to actually see. And what I saw broke through every wall I'd built. Willa wasn't just thin, she was damaged. The scars on her forearms, some white and old, faded into the skin like pencil marks, partially erased. Others newer, pinker, evidence of pain so deep it had turned inward, because there was nowhere else for it to go. The way she sat folded into herself, making herself as small as possible, like a person who'd learned that taking up space was dangerous. The dull lifelessness of her hair, the grayish tint to her skin, the dark crescents under her eyes that spoke of months, maybe years, of sleep that never came or never lasted. This wasn't a woman who'd run away to escape responsibility. This wasn't someone enjoying a secret life while her family suffered. This was a prisoner. A person barely surviving inside a concrete box, surrounded by photographs of a daughter she couldn't hold, kept alive by instant coffee and a hot plate, and whatever scraps of hope she could wring from pictures taped to a wall. The anger didn't disappear, it shifted, redirected, focused on the man who'd done this to her. Roger crouched down near Willa. "Careful not to get too close. We're not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was different now, gentler, slower, the voice he probably used with witnesses who'd been through trauma. "We're here because we want to help. Can you tell us what happened?" Willa raised her head, eyes red, swollen, terrified. She looked at Roger, then at me, then at the photos of Ivy on the wall. "If I tell you," she said, and her voice was so small it barely qualified as sound, "you'll hate me." "I don't hate you," I said. The anger was still there. I could feel it coiled in my chest like a spring, but it wasn't aimed at her anymore. "I just need to know why." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, stared at the concrete floor. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd changed her mind. Then she started talking. 7 years ago, March, Natalie came over to my apartment. I went still. Natalie Hughes, Willa's best friend since college. Maid of honor at the wedding. The woman who'd read from Corinthians at the funeral with mascara streaking down her cheeks. I'd sent her a condolence card after the service, thanking her for being such a good friend to Willa. She'd never responded. She'd borrowed money from me, Willa continued. $5,000. I needed it back because Brad and I were saving for a down payment on a house, and she kept making excuses next week, next month, when her tax refund came. It had been almost a year. She stopped, pulled her knees tighter. That night I told her I needed it, really needed it, no more excuses, and she got defensive, started yelling, saying I thought I was better than her, that I didn't understand how hard things were for her. Willa's voice had gone mechanical, like she'd rehearsed this story so many times it had worn grooves in her mind. I told her she was irresponsible, that if she stopped wasting money, she could pay me back, and she got in my face, really in my face, screaming. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. I pushed her, not hard, just to get her away from me. But she stumbled backward and hit the coffee table, the corner of it, right here. She touched the side of her head, above her temple. There was this sound, this awful, wrong sound, and she fell, just collapsed. The warehouse was utterly silent. I could hear my own blood moving through my veins. There was so much on the carpet, Willa said, on the table, on my hands, and Natalie wasn't moving. I tried to check, but I was panicking, crying so hard I couldn't see straight. I couldn't feel a pulse. There was too much, and I couldn't think, and "You called Brad," Roger said. He came home right away, walked in and saw Natalie on the floor and just stared, for maybe 10 seconds. Then he checked her, put his fingers on her neck. Willa's eyes were somewhere far away, watching the scene replay on a screen only she could see, and he looked at me and said, "She's gone." My stomach turned. I saw where this was going and I wanted to stop it, wanted to rewind to the moment before Willa pushed Natalie and keep my daughter in a world where this night never happened. But I couldn't. Nobody could. So I listened. "I fell apart," Willa said. Completely fell apart. Brad was the opposite, calm, controlled, thinking 3 steps ahead. He said it was self-defense, that I was protecting myself. But he said even if it was an accident, I'd go to prison, that Natalie's family would push for charges, that I'd lose everything you, Mom, Ivy, everything. "So he suggested faking your death," Roger said, not a question. Willa nodded. "He said it was the only way. If everyone thought I was gone, nobody would connect me to what happened. He said he'd take care of everything, the situation, the evidence, all of it. I just had to trust him." Her voice cracked on the last word, splitting it in half. "And I did. Because he was my husband. Because I was terrified. Because I thought I'd..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "Brad handled everything," she continued after a moment. "He had to contact someone at the county morgue. A cousin named Gary. He got remains. Someone who'd passed away without family. Someone nobody would miss." She shuddered. A full-body tremor that made the cot creak beneath her. "And that same night, he brought me here. Told me to stay hidden while he arranged the rest. The accident on Route 9. The fire. The funeral." "The urn," I said. My voice sounded like someone else's. "I didn't know about the urn. Not until much later. Brad told me he'd handled the cremation, made everything look legitimate." She looked at me. "He never told me what was inside it. I didn't know until just now, from the way you're looking at me. What was in it?" "Coffee grounds," I said. "Coffee and cinnamon." Something died in her face. Not shock, something quieter. more devastating. The last ember of a belief she'd been clinging to. The belief that maybe some part of the lie had been handled with a shred of decency. "And Natalie?" Roger asked, leaning forward on the folding chair. "What happened to her after the fight?" "Brad said he took care of it. Wouldn't tell me where, wouldn't tell me how. Said it was safer for me not to know." "And you believed him?" "I believed everything. For 7 years." Her voice was hollow, scraped clean. "Every time I asked when I could leave, Brad said it wasn't safe yet. The police were still looking. Natalie's family had hired an investigator. People were asking questions. He said I had to wait, that if I came out, if anyone found out what happened, Ivy would suffer." She looked at the photos on the wall. He used Ivy. Every time I wavered, every time I thought about leaving or turning myself in, he'd remind me what it would do to her. Her mother, in prison. The shame, the media attention. He said she was better off thinking I was dead than knowing who I really was. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not the screaming, violent cruelty of a man who hits, though I suspected that had happened too. Looking at the way Willa flinched at, raised voices, and curled into herself when anyone moved too quickly. This was a different kind of cruelty. Surgical, psychological. The kind that dismantles a person from the inside, brick by brick, until there's nothing left but obedience and guilt and a desperate, pathetic gratitude for the scraps of life your captor allows you. Roger met my eyes. I saw the question in his face before he asked it. "Willa," he said carefully, "when Natalie fell when you checked on her and couldn't find a pulse, are you absolutely certain she didn't make it?" Willa stared at him. "What? Did you check thoroughly? Or were you crying, panicking, unable to see clearly?" There was so much I tried, but... "And Brad checked after you, put his fingers on her neck, told you she was gone." Roger paused. "But you didn't actually see him check. You were in shock. You trusted his word." "What are you saying?" Roger pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, turned the screen toward Willa. "I'm saying I ran Natalie Hughes through every database I have access to. And according to public records, employment history, social media, credit reports, and this photograph taken 6 weeks ago at a coffee shop on Main Street, Natalie Hughes is alive." The photograph showed a woman sitting at a small table near a window. Dark hair, mid-30s, smiling at something off camera. Healthy, happy, drinking coffee in the sunlight like a person who hadn't spent a single day of the last 7 years locked in a warehouse. Willa's face drained of color so completely she looked like a photograph herself, black and white, all contrast, no life. She stared at the phone. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not possible." "It's not just possible, it's true." Roger swiped to another photo. "This is Brad and Natalie 2 years ago at a restaurant in Wilmington." Swipe. "This is them last year." Same restaurant. Swipe. 6 months ago. A hotel in Newark. He kept swiping. More photos. Brad and Natalie together, close, intimate, laughing at tables and walking on sidewalks and living the kind of life that 280,000 stolen dollars can buy. They've been together for years, Willa, long before that night in your apartment. I think, and I don't say this lightly, the entire thing was staged. The fight. Natalie's fall, the injury, all of it. Willa shook her head. Small, rapid movements, like a machine malfunctioning. "No, I saw her fall. You saw what they wanted you to see. A staged fight that escalated. A rehearsed fall. Theatrical makeup, the kind you can buy online for $20. Fake scenario effects that look devastating but wash off in a shower." Roger's voice was firm but not harsh. "Natalie didn't fall by accident, Willa. She fell on purpose. And Brad walked in right on cue and confirmed the worst possible interpretation. Told you she was gone. Told you your life was over, unless you ran." "Why?" The word came out like something breaking. "Why would they do that?" "Because of me," I said. I hadn't meant to speak. The words just came, carried out on a wave of understanding, so horrible it left me physically nauseous. My money. They wanted my money. If Willa disappeared, if everyone believed she was dead, I'd send money to Brad to take care of Ivy. $40,000 a year, no questions asked. I'd do it out of love and grief, and a promise I made to my daughter. And I'd never stop, because stopping would mean letting Willa down. The room was silent. Then Willa made a sound I'd never heard from another human being, a low, keening moan, like an animal caught in a trap that had just realized the trap was designed specifically for it. She doubled over on the cot, arms wrapped around her stomach. 7 years, she said. 7 years I've been in this room believing believing I'd hurt someone, believing I deserved this. And it was all. She couldn't finish, didn't need to. Roger and I sat with her while she broke, not gently, not gracefully, but completely, the way things break when they've been held together too long by nothing but terror and guilt. She cried until she couldn't breathe. Then she breathed until she could cry again. And through it all, I held her hand and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. No words in any language that could bridge the gap between what she'd believed for 7 years and what she now knew to be true. When the worst of it passed, when Willa's breathing had steadied enough for coherent speech, Roger cleared his throat. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to act fast. He pulled up another screen on his phone. Brad's been moving money. 3 weeks ago, he transferred $60,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He and Natalie are planning to run. Willa wiped her face. Something had changed in her expression beneath the devastation, beneath the grief and shock. Something hard and bright was forming, like a blade being pulled from a fire. What do we do? She asked. We need them to confess, Roger said. On record. Admissible in court. That means a wire. You confront Brad, get him talking. Get him to admit what he did. All of it, the staged fight, the fake death, the money, the imprisonment, everything. You want me to face him. Not a question. A clarification. Like she was measuring the distance between where she was and where she needed to be. He thinks you're broken, Roger said. Thinks you'll never stand up to him. When you do, when you show strength instead of fear, he'll panic. And when people panic, they justify, they explain, they confess. Willa looked at the photos of Ivy on the wall, at the images of a daughter she'd watched grow up in two-dimensional fragments, never holding her, never hearing her voice, never feeling the weight of her small body climbing into her lap. He stole 7 years from me, she said quietly. He let my mother die. He used my daughter as a weapon against me. She looked at Roger with eyes that had finally found something to replace the emptiness. Not warmth, not yet. Something colder, something with an edge. Tell me what I need to do. Roger glanced at me. I nodded. Tomorrow, Roger said. I have a contact in the county police. Detective Kevin Walsh. He'll get us the wire official equipment, legally documented, fully admissible. He'll position officers nearby. If anything goes wrong, they move in immediately. And if nothing goes wrong, Willa asked, then we get every word Brad says on tape, and then we end this. Willa was silent for a long moment. Then she stood, slowly, painfully, like someone unfurling after years of being curled into a ball. She looked around the warehouse at the cot, the hot plate, the wire hangers, the battery lamp, and something in her face hardened into a resolution I recognized. I'd seen it in Gloria's face. I'd seen it in my own, reflected in dark windows late at night. I'm not staying here tonight, she said. You'll stay at my house, I told her. First real bed you've slept in since. I couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't either. But she nodded, and when we walked out of that warehouse together, she didn't look back. Not once. At my house, I set her up in Willa's old room, the room Gloria had kept exactly as it was, the room I hadn't changed in 7 years, because changing it felt like erasing the last trace of my daughter from the world. Willa stood in the doorway and stared at her own childhood bedroom, like it belonged to a stranger. Then she walked in, sat on the bed, and ran her hand across the quilt Gloria had made years ago. Mom made this, she said. She did. Willa pressed the fabric to her face and breathed in. I don't know what she smelled, dust, probably, and old laundry detergent, and maybe, if she was lucky, the faintest ghost of Gloria's perfume. Whatever it was, it broke something loose inside her, and she cried again, but differently this time. Softer. The tears of someone who has found something they thought was lost forever. I closed the door and let her be, sat in the kitchen with cold coffee and the scattered remains of a fake urn and waited for morning. Through the wall, around 3 a.m., I heard her crying. I didn't go in. Some grief needs to be private. Some pain can only be processed alone. But I stayed awake, listened, made sure she knew even through a wall, even without words, that someone was there. Tomorrow, my daughter would face the man who'd stolen her life. Tomorrow, 7 years of lies would end. And whatever came after the fear, the confession, the consequences, we'd face it the way we should have faced everything from the beginning. Together. The wire was smaller than a dime. Detective Kevin Walsh held it between his thumb and forefinger that afternoon, turning it slowly in the fluorescent light of a small office at the county police station, not the main building, but a secondary facility Walsh used for sensitive operations. Plain walls, metal table, recording equipment spread across it like instruments before surgery. "This," Walsh said, looking at Willa, "is your lifeline and ours." He was younger than Roger, mid-40s, sharp-eyed. The kind of cop who'd seen enough to be cynical but still cared enough to show up early. Roger had vouched for him, said he was one of the few detectives he'd trust with his own family. That was enough for me. Willa stared at the device. Her hands were shaking, but her jaw was set the same stubborn line I'd seen on her face 1,000 times growing up. When she'd decided something, and the entire world could go to hell before she'd change her mind. She'd slept maybe 2 hours the night before. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bruised with exhaustion. But something had shifted in her overnight. Some internal architecture had rearranged itself, and the woman sitting across from Walsh wasn't the same one we'd found, curled on a cot in a warehouse. That woman had been hollowed out. This one had been filled with something dangerous. Walsh spent 20 minutes walking her through the equipment, how the wire clipped under clothing near the collarbone, how it picked up everything within 15 feet crystal clear, court-admissible audio, how to move naturally so it wouldn't show or make noise, how to test the signal, professional, methodical, patient. The kind of thoroughness that comes from having done this 100 times and understanding that the 101st mattered just as much. "If anything goes wrong," Walsh said, "you say Ivy's name. Doesn't matter what context. You could be mid-sentence, mid-thought. The second we hear that name, my team comes through the door. You won't even finish the word before we're there." Willa nodded. "Ivy, you don't have to do this," Walsh added. His voice softened, and I saw something in his expression that went beyond professional obligation, something personal, like this case had gotten under his skin the way certain cases do. "The ones that follow you home, we can find another way." "There is no other way," Willa said quietly. "Not one that gets them both. Not one that makes them answer for everything." She paused, looked at me. "He let my mother die. He used my daughter. He kept me in a cage for 7 years and told me I deserved it. I need him to say it out loud. I need it on record, not just for the court." Her voice hardened. "For me." Walsh held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "We go tonight, 7 o'clock. My team will be in position by 6:30. Unmarked vehicles, plain clothes. You won't see them, but they'll be close enough to hear you breathe." After Walsh left to coordinate with his team, Willa and I sat alone in that bare room with the wire on the table between us like a grenade neither of us wanted to touch. "Dad," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." She started to speak, stopped, started again. "Do you hate me for what I put you through?" The question landed somewhere between my ribs. "No, Willa. I let Mom die thinking I was gone. I let you pay all that money. I let Ivy grow up without." "Stop." I moved my chair closer, took her hands thin, cold, the nails bitten down to nothing. "You didn't do any of that. Brad did. Natalie did. They manipulated you into believing you'd committed a terrible act, and then they used your guilt and your love for Ivy to keep you trapped. None of this is your fault. I should have checked. I should have questioned him. I should have. You were 26 years old, and terrified, and covered in what you believed was evidence of the worst moment of your life. Your husband, the person you trusted most in the world, told you he could fix it. You believed him because that's what trust looks like." I squeezed her hands. "Don't blame yourself for being human, Willa. Blame the people who used your humanity against you." She was crying again, but quietly this time, tears that slid down her cheeks without sound, like they'd become so familiar they no longer required effort. "Your mom would be proud of you," I said, "for surviving, for being willing to face him tonight, for being braver than anyone should ever have to be." She squeezed my hands back and didn't let go for a long time. "The hours before the operation moved like something thick and slow, honey, or dread. Roger came by at 4, with sandwiches nobody ate. Walsh called at 5 to confirm his team was mobilizing. At 5:30, Walsh arrived at my house to fit the wire on Willa. She stood in the bathroom with her back to me while he clipped the device under her collar and tested the signal. His voice crackled through a receiver on the kitchen table. "Testing. 1, 2, 3. Signal is clean. Everything worked. Everything was ready. Nothing felt ready. At 6:15, Willa drove back to the warehouse alone. That was the plan. She'd return as if nothing had changed. As if she'd spent the night on her cot staring at photos of Ivy like she'd done every night for 7 years. Brad would come at his usual time, expecting the usual submission, the usual silence, the usual broken woman who asked no questions and made no demands. He would not find that woman tonight. Roger and I were in his car by 6:30, parked 50 yards from building Bonchambonmui Bay, close enough to see the side entrance through the telephoto lens. Far enough that Brad wouldn't notice two old men in a gray sedan. Walsh's team was positioned around the perimeter, 3 unmarked vehicles, 6 officers, all of them listening to the same audio feed from Willa's wire. In my ear, a small receiver connected to Walsh's frequency. I could hear everything Willa heard, the hum of the battery lamp, her own breathing steady, measured, the breathing of someone who'd practiced being calm until it became a kind of armor. 7 o'clock passed. 7:15, 7:30. The waiting was a physical thing, a pressure in my chest, a tightness in my jaw, a constant urge to open the car door and run across the street and pull my daughter out of that building before anything could go wrong. Roger sat beside me, camera in his lap, utterly still. 30 years of stakeouts had taught him how to wait. I had no such training. Every minute felt like it was being extracted from me with pliers. At 7:47, headlights turned onto East Industrial Avenue. "That's them," Roger said, raising the camera. Silver sedan. It pulled into the warehouse lot and parked near the side entrance. 2 doors opened. Brad emerged from the driver's side tall, clean-cut, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Ivy's monthly expenses. Natalie got out of the passenger side, dark hair, leather jacket, the same confident walk I'd seen outside my store. They moved toward the entrance like two people arriving at a restaurant, casual and unhurried, the body language of people who believed they had nothing to fear. Brad pulled out a key, opened the door, went inside. Natalie followed. Walsh's voice in my ear, quiet and precise. "Both targets inside. All units hold." Through the receiver, I heard footsteps on concrete, the scrape of the door closing. Then Brad's voice, casual, almost cheerful, the voice of a man who had no idea his world was about to collapse. "Willa, brought you a surprise tonight." More footsteps, lighter, Natalie's heels clicking on the concrete floor. A pause long enough that my hand tightened on the door handle, and Roger put his hand on my arm to keep me still. Then Brad's voice again, different now. The cheerfulness replaced by something sharper. "You're not surprised." Silence. I held my breath. Then Willa spoke, and her voice was the steadiest I'd heard it since we found her. "I know everything, Brad." A beat. Then his voice, careful, measured, the voice of a man who spent 7 years controlling a narrative and isn't ready to give that up. "No, what? What are you talking about? I know Natalie's alive. I know you lied to me, both of you, for 7 years." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the battery lamp through the wire. Then Natalie's voice, cool, almost curious, the way someone sounds when they encounter an unexpected variable in an otherwise predictable equation. "How did you find out?" My skin crawled. Not the question of an innocent person, not "what are you talking about?" or "that's crazy," or any of the denials a wrongly accused person would reach for. Just calm, pragmatic curiosity. How did you find out? As if the lie itself wasn't the issue, only the breach in its security. "Does it matter?" Willa said. "You lied. You made me think I'd hurt someone. You kept me locked in here while you lived your lives." Brad's voice shifted harder now, the mask slipping. "You were supposed to stay hidden." "Hidden from what? The police aren't looking for me, are they?" "They never were." "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Willa's voice was stronger now, and I felt something like awe mixed with the terror. My daughter standing in front of the 2 people who'd destroyed her life, demanding answers with a steadiness that shouldn't have been possible but was. "Tell me why. Why did you do this?" Another pause, movement, footsteps. Then Brad spoke, and the words came out with a flatness that was worse than any scream or threat could have been, the flatness of someone who has stopped pretending and no longer sees the point. "Because we needed the money." Just like that. No hesitation, no shame, no attempt to soften it or frame it or dress it up in anything resembling remorse. 3 words, delivered with the emotional weight of someone explaining why they'd chosen one restaurant over another. "Your father's money," Natalie added, matter of fact. Clinical. $40,000 a year, for 7 years, $280,000 total. It was a good arrangement. Roger's hand clamped down on my shoulder. Hard, holding me in the car, holding me together. You did this for money, Willa said. Her voice cracked, but she held it. Held herself. You made me believe I'd hurt my best friend. You let my mother die of grief. You took my daughter from me, for money. It wasn't personal, Natalie said. And the casualness of it, the sheer breathtaking indifference, made my vision blur with rage. It was business. Your father had money. We needed it. You were the mechanism. Mechanism. She called my daughter a mechanism. My mother died, Willa said. She died believing I burned to death on Route 9. That wasn't the plan, Brad said. And this is the part I'll carry for the rest of my life. The part that wakes me up at 3 a.m. and sits on my chest like a stone, Natalie responded. But it worked out. Made the whole thing more believable. Your father was so devastated he never questioned anything. I wanted to kill her. I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it for drama. In that moment, hearing Natalie Hughes describe my wife's death as a fortunate development in their business plan, I wanted to cross that parking lot and put my hands around her throat. The rage was pure, white-hot, elemental. The kind of anger that exists before civilization, before law, before any of the structures humans built to keep the animal inside us from doing what the animal wants to do. Roger's hand tightened on my shoulder. Wait, he whispered. Let them finish. Through the wire, the confession kept coming. Brad explained the staged fight, Natalie's rehearsed fall, the theatrical makeup, the fake blood they'd bought online. He explained the contact at the morgue his cousin Gary, who'd provided unclaimed remains for $5,000. He explained the car fire on Route 9, how he'd staged it on a clear night, made sure the flames destroyed everything identifiable, made sure the only person who could confirm the victim's identity was himself. And the urn? Willa asked. Natalie laughed. Actually laughed. Coffee grounds and cinnamon, some other kitchen stuff. Your father kept that thing on his mantle for 7 years, never opened it once. Every word was being recorded, every confession, every detail, every casual admission of cruelty captured in crystal-clear audio by a wire smaller than a dime, clipped to my daughter's collarbone while she stood in a warehouse, and let the people who'd destroyed her life believe they were still in control. And tomorrow? Willa asked. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow we fly to Grand Cayman, Brad said. New identities, fresh start, 60,000 in the offshore account, enough to disappear properly this time. What about Ivy? The silence that followed was Brad's final confession, not of a crime, but of a character. When he spoke, his voice carried the same flatness as before, the same indifference, the same fundamental emptiness where a conscience should have been. She's not my problem anymore. I heard Willa draw a breath, heard it catch, then release. And then she said something we hadn't planned, something that wasn't in Roger's script or Walsh's protocols or any of the scenarios we'd rehearsed. Take me with you. Roger's head snapped toward me. In my ear, Walsh's voice. That's not the script. Hold positions. Let it play. What? Brad sounded confused. To the Caymans. Take me with you. Let me disappear for real. I understood what she was doing even before Roger did. She wasn't breaking script. She was pushing them further, creating the conditions for them to reveal who they truly were when they thought they had total power over another person. She was giving them rope. Natalie's voice, cold and sharp. We don't need her. She knows too much. She comes with us, Brad said slowly. Or, the pause stretched, expanded, filled with implication. Or what? Willa asked. Brad's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but the wire caught every syllable, every consonant, every breath between the words. Or we make sure you never tell anyone, ever. Walsh's voice in my ear, tight and urgent. That's a direct threat. All units prepare to move on my signal. But Willa wasn't done. She held her ground for 3 more seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. And Brad's voice came again, colder now, stripped of every pretense. You've always been a liability, Willa. Since the beginning. Then sounds, movement, a sharp intake of breath. Willa's voice, no longer calm. Let go of me. I didn't think. The car door was open, and I was running before Roger could grab me, before Walsh could give the signal, before anything except the sound of my daughter's fear could register in a brain that had stopped processing anything beyond the need to reach her. 50 yards of cracked asphalt and weeds. Roger behind me, shouting into his radio. All units, move in now, go. Sirens erupted from every direction. Headlights blazed to life. The industrial district, dead and empty seconds before, exploded with sound and motion. Police vehicles converging, officers emerging. The coordinated chaos of a takedown that had been coiled and waiting for exactly this moment. I hit the warehouse door with my shoulder. It flew open. Inside, Brad gripping Willa's arm, her body twisted away from him. Natalie near the exit, car keys in hand, face already calculating escape routes, all three of them turning toward me as the door crashed against the wall. Get away from my daughter. The words came from somewhere primal, somewhere beyond thought or language or the careful restraint I'd practiced for 68 years. Brad's hand dropped. Willa stumbled backward. And then the warehouse filled with officers, black uniforms, tactical vests, voices sharp and commanding. Police, hands up, don't move. Walsh was first through the door behind me. Brad Wallace, Natalie Hughes, hands where I can see them. Brad ran, made it 3 steps before Walsh took him down. One fluid motion, knee to the back, face to concrete, handcuffs clicking into place before Brad could draw breath to protest. Natalie didn't run. She raised her hands slowly, expression blank, almost bored, as though 7 years of conspiracy and imprisonment and the systematic destruction of a family warranted nothing more than mild inconvenience. Another officer cuffed her, started reading rights. And Willa, my daughter, stood in the center of it all, wires still hidden under her shirt, looking like someone who'd been underwater for 7 years and had just broken the surface. I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, and this time the crying was different, not the broken, hopeless crying of the warehouse or the quiet tears of a woman confronting her own stolen life. This was release. Pure, violent, total release. 7 years of captivity pouring out through her body and into mine. It's over, I said. You're safe. It's over. Dad. Her voice cracked into pieces. I'm sorry about everything. About Mom. About the money. About... We'll figure it out. Together. All of it. Behind us, Walsh was reading Brad his charges: fraud, conspiracy, grand theft, false imprisonment, identity theft, accessory to unlawful handling of human remains, threatening a witness. The list went on like a catalog of sins. Brad's face had gone white, not with remorse, with the realization that every word he'd spoken in the last 30 minutes had been recorded, documented, and would follow him into a courtroom where no amount of charm or manipulation could save him. We recorded everything, Mr. Wallace, Walsh said. Every confession, every threat, crystal clear. Brad looked at Willa. Understanding dawned slow, visible, devastating. You set us up. Willa wiped her eyes, looked at him, and for the first time in 7 years, she looked strong. No, she said, I just told the truth. They led Brad out first. As he passed me, he twisted back, and his face was something I'll never forget. Not anger, not defiance, but the naked bewilderment of a man who'd believed he was smarter than everyone around him and had just discovered he wasn't. We were so close, he said. His voice cracked. We had everything planned. Walsh shook his head. You were never close, Mr. Wallace. The police vehicles pulled away one by one, lights flashing red and blue against the warehouse walls. Brad in one car, Natalie in another. Gary Wells picked up at his apartment 30 minutes later, crying before the cuffs were even on. 3 people who'd conspired to erase my daughter from existence, finally riding toward the consequences they'd dodged for 7 years. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. On Valentine's Day, they returned guilty verdicts on every count for every defendant. Brad received 15 years. Natalie received 12. Gary received 5. All 3 were ordered to pay full restitution. Brad's parental rights were terminated. Custody of Ivy was granted to me, with a structured reunification plan for Willa overseen by a family therapist. Those are the facts, the numbers, the sentences, the legal outcomes. They matter. They represent accountability, consequence, the system working the way it's supposed to work. But they're not the story. The story is what came after. The story is Willa moving into a small apartment 10 minutes from my house and learning to sleep with the lights off for the first time in 7 years. The story is Ivy confused, cautious, brave beyond her years, meeting her mother in supervised visits that started at 1 hour and gradually, painfully, beautifully, grew longer. The story is the afternoon Ivy asked Willa to teach her how to braid hair, and they sat on my couch for an hour, Willa's hands guiding Ivy's smaller ones, both of them concentrating with the fierce attention of people building something sacred from scratch. When they finished, Ivy looked in the mirror and smiled. "Mom did it," she said. Willa left the room before Ivy could see her cry. The story is, Harper Family Market reopening with Willa behind the counter, learning the business the way I'd learned it from my father, not from a manual, but from proximity, from repetition, from the slow accumulation of knowledge that passes between generations like light through glass. She had ideas I'd never considered. Online ordering, a small cafe in the corner, expansion. She talked about the future the way people talk about the future when they've spent 7 years believing they didn't have one, hungrily, greedily, with a desperate appreciation for possibilities that most people take for granted. The story is Sundays, our Sundays. Spaghetti at my house, using Gloria's recipe, the one with too much garlic and never enough basil, the one Willa had begged for every weekend as a teenager. Ivy sets the table now. Willa makes the sauce. I supervise, which mostly means sitting at the counter pretending I'm not crying while my daughter and granddaughter move through my kitchen like they've always been there. We visit Gloria's grave together every Sunday morning. Willa brings white roses, Gloria's favorites. Ivy talks about school, about her friends, about the drawings she's working on and the books she's reading. I tell Gloria the things she'd want to hear, that Willa's home, that Ivy's thriving, that the store is doing well, that we're okay, not perfect, not healed, not yet but okay, getting better, moving forward. One Sunday, Ivy stood at the headstone and said something that stopped us both cold. "Grandpa, do you think Grandma knows Mom's back?" I looked at Willa. She was crying silently, one hand pressed to the marble. "I think she knows," I said. "I really do." Some restitution money came through, not all of it. Brad and Natalie had spent most of what they'd stolen. About $60,000 was recovered. I put half into a trust for Ivy's college education, gave a quarter to Willa, donated the rest to a domestic violence charity in Gloria's name. The money mattered less than I expected. You'd think losing $280,000 would leave a wound, but it turns out the wound was never about the money. It was about the trust. And trust, unlike money, can be rebuilt slowly, imperfectly, with effort and patience, and the willingness to try again, even when trying feels impossible. Forgiveness is the part nobody tells you about. Not the dramatic kind, not the moment in a courtroom, or the scene in a movie where someone says, "I forgive you," and the music swells. Real forgiveness is quieter than that, messier. It happens in pieces, over months, in small moments you don't recognize as significant until later. It's choosing not to bring up the past when you're angry about something else. It's looking at your daughter and seeing who she is now instead of who she was forced to become. It's letting go of the fantasy of how things should have been and making peace with how they are. I'm still working on it. Some days the anger comes back sudden, sharp, triggered by nothing more than the smell of cinnamon in a grocery aisle or the sight of a brass container in a shop window. Some days I think about Gloria, and the rage is so fresh, it feels like the urn is still sitting on my mantle, mocking me. Some days I want Brad and Natalie to suffer more than 15 and 12 years. Some days I want them to feel what Gloria felt, what Willa felt, what Ivy felt growing up motherless in a house with a father who saw her as nothing more than a revenue source. But most days, I choose something different. Not forgetting, never forgetting. Choosing to focus on what I have instead of what was taken. Choosing to watch Willa laugh at something Ivy says, and let that sound fill the space where the grief used to live. Choosing to believe that 7 years of darkness don't have to define the years that come after. Last week, Willa came into the store carrying 2 cups of coffee from the cafe. She'd convinced me to open the one that's already turning a profit. The one she runs with the terrifying efficiency of a woman who has no intention of wasting a single minute of her recovered life. She set 1 cup on the counter in front of me and smiled. "Try it," she said. "New recipe, cinnamon latte." I stared at her. She stared back. And then we both started laughing, the kind of laughter that hurts, that bends you double, that has tears mixed in with the joy because some things are so absurd and so painful and so deeply, fundamentally human, that the only response left is to laugh until you can't breathe. "You're something else," I said when I could speak again. "I learned from the best." She kissed my cheek. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart." She went back to the cafe. I stood behind the register, sipping a cinnamon latte that tasted nothing like grief. and watched through the window as Ivy ran across the parking lot with her backpack bouncing 7, heading for the candy aisle the way she did every afternoon after school. Willa caught her at the door, scooped her up, spun her around. Ivy shrieked with laughter. The sound filled the store, bounced off the shelves, reached me at the counter like a hand on my shoulder. 3 generations. My father built this store. I kept it alive. Willa will take it further than either of us imagined. And Ivy will do something none of us can predict. Because that's what children do when you give them the one thing every child deserves, the truth and the freedom to grow beyond it. 7 years of lies. A lifetime of truth ahead. If this story taught me anything, and it taught me more than I ever wanted to learn, it's this. Don't wait 7 years to open the urn. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever truth you've been avoiding, whatever question you've been too scared or too tired or too trusting to ask it now, today, before the lie grows roots, before it costs you something you can't get back. Anger is easy, forgiveness is hard, but healing is worth every painful, imperfect, beautiful step. And family, real family, the kind that survives betrayal and grief and 7 years of darkness. Family is the only thing that matters in the end.